I cheated on him. Then one day he sent me a video titled Goodby. This is the story of Daniel Whitmore and his wife Nadia Whitmore. They had been married for 7 years when the cracks began. Not in the loud, obvious way that marriages break in movies, but in the quiet way that a window frosts over, gradually, imperceptibly, until one morning you press your hand against the glass and realize you can no longer see through it. Daniel was a man who loved carefully, methodically, in the way that some people tend a garden. Present, patient, unhurried. Nadia had once found this beautiful. Then, somewhere in the middle years, she began to find it suffocating, or perhaps simply insufficient. She could never quite explain the difference, even to herself. What followed was not a decision so much as a series of small surrenders, each one justifiable in isolation, each one quietly catastrophic in accumulation. This is the story of what she gave away without understanding its value, and what she discovered only after the door had already closed behind her. The Tuesday morning routine had not changed in 4 years. Daniel woke first, always. Nadia would hear the sound of the shower running, the particular rhythm of his movements through the apartment, the soft thud of the cabinet closing in the bathroom, the kettle clicking on, the specific creak of the third floorboard near the kitchen door. She had memorized these sounds without meaning to, the way you memorize the pattern of a ceiling you've stared at long enough. She lay in the warmth he'd left behind and listened to him make her coffee, and she told herself that this reliable, unglamorous tenderness was enough. It almost was. Daniel brought the coffee to the nightstand without being asked. He set it at the precise distance from the edge she preferred, something he'd learned without her ever articulating it. He sat on his side of the bed to put on his shoes, and she watched the back of his neck as he bent over the laces. The slight curl of dark hair there, the familiar set of his shoulders, and felt something she couldn't name, not love, exactly, in that moment. Something quieter and more complicated. Something like the echo of love, still reverberating in a room where the source had grown distant. "You have that thing with Petra tonight?" he asked, not turning around. "Dinner, yeah. Probably late." He nodded. He had the quality, rare in people, of accepting information without interrogating it. Nadia had always appreciated this. Lately, she found it unnerving. "I'll leave something in the fridge," he said. "You don't have to. I know." He kissed her forehead on the way out, his lips warm and brief and familiar, and Nadia closed her eyes and held the coffee and listened to the front door close behind him. The apartment settled into silence. She stared at the ceiling. She was not, she told herself, unhappy. Unhappiness implied something acute, something identifiable. What she felt was more like a low, persistent hum beneath everything, a frequency she couldn't locate or name, only sense. She was 34 years old, and her life was organized and comfortable and safe. And sometimes at 3 in the afternoon, she would sit at her desk at work and feel something close to grief without knowing what she was grieving. She had met Owen Farrell 4 months ago at a client dinner. He was the kind of man who made her room aware of him without appearing to try. Loud in the way that certain silences are loud. Electric in some quality she couldn't isolate. He had looked at her across the table with a directness that startled her. And she had felt, for the first time in a long time, seen, not in the way Daniel saw her. Thoroughly, patiently, without theater. Owen's attention was something else. It was urgent. It made her feel briefly intoxicatingly, like a woman in the story where interesting things were still possible. She had not planned anything. She was certain of this. She was a reasonable person. She understood consequences. She loved her husband in the residual, structural way you love something that has become part of the architecture of your life. But she was so tired of architecture. By the 3rd week, they had begun meeting for lunch. By the 6th, the lunches had changed into something she did not examine too closely. She was careful. She was meticulous. She told herself it would not go further, and then it did, and she rearranged her internal vocabulary to accommodate the new reality. Connection, she called it. Privately. Complicated. She did not use the simple word, the correct word, because the correct word had a weight she wasn't prepared to carry. Daniel was home when she returned from what she had told him was Petra's dinner. He was on the couch reading, the lamp throwing a small, warm circle of light around him, and he looked up and smiled. An easy, unguarded smile, the smile of a man with nothing to defend, and said, "There's pasta in the fridge." "Thank you," she said. She went to change her clothes and stood in the bathroom for a moment with both hands on the edge of the sink, looking at her own face in the mirror. She looked, she thought, exactly the same. This surprised her, and then frightened her. And then she exhaled and went to the kitchen and ate the pasta he had made for her. And it was very good, and she did not speak much. And he did not notice. He fell asleep first that night, as he usually did. She lay beside him in the dark and listened to his breathing even out, and she thought about nothing in particular, and the distance between them, measurable in inches, unmeasurable in every other way, felt, for one clear, unguarded moment, like the saddest thing she had ever known. She turned to face the wall and closed her eyes. In the morning, the kettle clicked on. The third floorboard creaked. The coffee appeared at the exact right distance from the edge of the nightstand. Nadia wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at the ceiling and said nothing. March arrived gray and slow. The city outside their apartment windows looked provisional, as if it hadn't fully committed to the season yet. Nadia moved through the weeks with the practiced ease of someone managing a performance she had given many times. Lines memorized, marks hit, nothing visibly wrong. Owen had become, in these months, something she had not anticipated, a habit. Not a passion, not a crisis, a habit, which in some ways was worse. She would text him from the bathroom. She would think of something he'd said during a meeting with a client and suppress a smile that had nothing to do with the meeting. She had constructed an entire second layer of her daily life, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had, without realizing it, significant practice at compartmentalization. Daniel noticed something. She could tell because he started watching her in a way that was almost identical to his usual watchfulness, except for a faint quality of effort behind it, as though attention that had once been effortless now required intention. He didn't say anything directly. This was characteristic of him. He processed slowly, thoroughly, and would not speak until he was certain of what he wanted to say. She had once loved this about him. Now it made her nervous. One evening in the third week of March, they were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. Daniel was reading the news on his phone. Nadia was working through emails on her laptop. The domestic scene was perfectly ordinary. The light was good. There was music playing from somewhere, a playlist he'd made years ago that they'd never updated. "You seem somewhere else lately," he said, without looking up from his phone. Nadia did not pause her typing. "Work has been a lot. I know. You mentioned the Alderman account. It's consuming everything." He set down his phone then, and she felt rather than saw the shift in his attention, the weight of it moving from the screen to her. She kept her eyes on the laptop. "Is there something you want to talk about?" he asked. The question was careful, not accusatory, not suspicious in any way she could specifically object to, and yet it landed in her chest with a precision that made her breath tighten. Because Daniel asked questions like a man who already knew the approximate shape of the answer and was giving her the chance to meet him halfway. She looked up. His face was open, and this was somehow harder to bear than if it had been closed. "No," she said, and held his gaze. "I'm just tired." He nodded slowly. The quality of the nod was not quite believing, not quite doubting. It occupied the space between those things. "Okay," he said. He picked up his phone. The music continued. Nadia returned to her emails, and her heart beat at an unusual rate for the next several minutes, and then gradually settled, and she told herself that this was nothing, that she had handled it, that it was over. It was not over. 2 weeks later she made an error. Not a significant one. A casual text from Owen while her phone was on the counter. Face up, his name visible when it lit. She was in the other room. When she came back to the kitchen, Daniel was standing at the counter pouring water, not looking at her phone, apparently not having seen it. She slipped the phone into her pocket. That night, lying in the dark, she became aware that Daniel's breathing had not slowed into sleep the way it usually did. He was awake beside her, still, deliberate, contained. She waited. He said nothing. Eventually, her own exhaustion overtook her vigilance, and she slept. In the morning, he was gone before she woke. No coffee on the nightstand. She told herself this was a coincidence. He had an early meeting. She did not examine it too carefully. She called Owen on the way to work and spoke to him for 11 minutes. And by the time she arrived at the office, she had managed to feel, if not quite good, then at least neutral, which was, she had learned, close enough. Daniel came home that evening with flowers. Pink peonies, her favorite, the kind he always found at the place on Clement Street that required a deliberate detour. He said nothing about the flowers being unusual, and she said nothing about the flowers being unusual. And they ate dinner together and talked about small things, and the flowers stood in the blue vase on the table between them like a question she couldn't answer. After dinner, doing dishes, he said, quietly, his back to her, "I've been feeling a little disconnected from you lately. I don't know if it's work or just, I don't know." Nadia set down the glass she was drying. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him from behind, her cheek against his shoulder blade. She felt him exhale. "We're fine," she said. "I love you." He put his hand over hers where they crossed at his chest. He held it there. "I love you too," he said. She closed her eyes. The lie sat in her mouth with the particular density of something swallowed wrong. And she held on to him and breathed through it, and the flowers stood in the vase behind her, pink and full and quietly, irreversibly wilting at the edges. It was a Saturday in early April when Daniel found the photographs. Nadia had been out. A yoga class that was genuinely a yoga class. One of the few unimplicated hours of her week. He had not been looking for anything. He had been trying to find the confirmation email for a restaurant reservation. Had picked up her tablet from the kitchen counter to check if it had synced with her calendar, and the screen had come alive mid-gallery. A thread of photographs from a camera roll that had never been fully cleared. She came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table. No laptop, no phone, no book. Just Daniel, sitting in the quiet apartment with his hands flat on the table in front of him, looking at nothing in particular. The yoga mat was still over her shoulder. She registered something in the room before she registered his face. A quality of stillness that was different from his usual stillness. The stillness had a texture. "Hey," she said, and the word felt immediately inadequate. "Hey!" His voice was even. This was what struck her first. How even it was. She set the yoga mat against the wall. She did not move toward him immediately, because her body was already performing the calculus of the room, reading variables she wasn't consciously processing. She poured herself a glass of water at the sink and took a long drink of it with her back to him. "I picked up your tablet this morning," he said. She set the glass down, turned around. The gallery was open. Nadia stood very still. She became aware of her breathing. She watched Daniel's face, and it was doing something she could not fully categorize. Working through something, containing something, organizing itself around something that she understood, with a cold clarity that arrived without warning, was not surprise. He had arrived at this room having already spent time with it. He had been sitting here long enough to pass through the first several stages of something and arrive at this deliberate, terrible quiet. "Daniel, I don't want to hear an explanation right now." His voice remained level. "I don't think I'm ready for it." She opened her mouth, closed it. He looked at his hands on the table. "I've been sitting here for 3 hours," he said, "trying to figure out if I'm shocked. And I'm not. I think that's what's hardest." He paused. "I've been watching you for 2 months. Something was different. I kept telling myself I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," she said, because suddenly, inexplicably, she could not lie. "Not in this room, not to this face." He nodded, a single slow nod, as if she'd confirmed the alignment of something he'd been measuring. "Is it someone I know?" "No." "How long?" 5 months. He absorbed this with the same terrible, careful stillness. She wanted him to raise his voice. She wanted accusation, anger, something sharp that she could push back against, defend herself against, something that would make this a fight rather than a reckoning. But Daniel was not giving her a fight. He was giving her something far more difficult, which was simply his full attention, undistorted by performance. "I don't know how to explain it to you in a way that wouldn't sound," she began. "Then don't." Not harshly, just directly. "I need you to understand that it wasn't about you not being Nadia." His voice was very quiet. "I don't think that's true, and I don't think it would help me if it were." She sat down across from him because her legs were not quite reliable anymore. The kitchen was very ordinary around them. The blue vase, the chairs they picked out together at a market in Portland, the window with the view of the neighbor's magnolia tree. All of it present, unchanged, indifferent. "I'm going to stay at my brother's tonight," he said. "I need some time to think." "Okay," she whispered. He stood. He did not slam anything, did not knock over a chair. He moved to the bedroom with the measured movements of a person conserving energy for something longer than this moment. She sat at the table and listened to him pack a bag, quiet, efficient, unhurried, and she thought about the flowers he had bought her, about his hand over hers at the sink, about every morning coffee set at the exact right distance from the edge. He passed through the kitchen on his way out. He paused at the door. "I need you to not call Owen in the next few days," he said. "Not a command. A request, made with dignity." She looked up. "I don't know what I'm going to decide," he said, "but I need to be able to think without knowing that's happening." She nodded. She could not speak. He left. The door closed without a sound. She sat at the kitchen table as the afternoon light moved across the floor, and the magnolia outside the window moved in a wind she could not feel. And she sat there for a long time doing nothing, saying nothing, simply inhabiting the particular silence of a woman who has finally caught up to the truth she has been outrunning for months. He came back after 4 days, and they attempted to repair. This was Nadia's framing of it. Attempted to repair, and she would spend considerable time, later, examining why she had chosen that passive, uncertain construction, as though the attempt itself were already a kind of admission that it might fail. But in the weeks immediately following, she did not examine it. She was too busy being, as she told herself, present. She cooked dinners. She came home before 7. She deleted Owen's contact from her phone with a deliberateness she allowed herself to feel as proof of commitment. Daniel came back into their apartment and their routine with a quality she couldn't quite name. Present, functional, available in all the surface ways, but altered in some fundamental register. The way a piece of furniture looks different after you've moved it and moved it back, occupying the same space, but you can see where it's been. He did not bring up Owen again, and this absence, which she had initially taken for forgiveness, gradually revealed itself as something more complex. He was not pretending. Daniel was constitutionally incapable of performing something he didn't feel. What he was doing, she came to understand, was deciding, slowly, privately, in the way he did everything, what he actually wanted. He was a man who understood that immediate decisions made in emotional weather often require correction, and so he was waiting for the weather to settle before he trusted what he could see. Nadia misread this as progress. She called Petra and described the situation in terms that shifted emphasis in ways she was only partially conscious of. The acknowledgement of fault was present, but so was a certain elision around duration and a tendency to describe Daniel's quietness as withholding rather than processing. Petra listened. She said careful things. She did not challenge the framing because Petra was her friend, not his, and this was, Nadia told herself, simply how it was. She did not contact Owen. She was genuinely certain of this, and it was one of the few things she was not lying to herself about. Whatever Owen had been, escape, vanity, a door she had opened without understanding where it led. She did not miss him with any urgency. She missed the version of herself she had been with him, electric, visible, a woman about whom interesting things were still possible. This was the thing she could not quite explain even to herself, because to explain it fully would be to acknowledge that what she had wanted was not Owen, but a particular reflection, and that this made it worse, not better. May became June. The apartment held them both in its ordinary way. There were good evenings, dinners where conversation came easily, where she caught Daniel laughing at something she'd said and felt the particular warmth of a laugh you've earned from someone who was being honest with you. These moments felt like evidence, and she collected them. But she also noticed other things. Now that she was paying a different kind of attention, the coffee still appeared on the nightstand in the morning, but occasionally at the wrong distance from the edge, not far off but off. She could not tell if this was significance or coincidence. She began to find significance in everything, which she understood was not a healthy sign. She started therapy in early June with a woman named Dr. Ramsden and told her the story in the version that cast Nadia as a person who had made a terrible mistake and was working to repair it, and this was true, as far as it went. What she did not tell Dr. Ramsden, because she did not fully have language for it yet, the occasional feeling, late at night, that Daniel was grieving something privately, not with theatrics, not with any behavior she could specifically identify, but in some quality of his presence that had changed, like a note that has been played in a different key for so long that you almost forget the original pitch, but not quite, almost. She would reach for him in the dark sometimes, and he would respond, but the response had a quality of generosity about it that was different from what it used to be, as though he were giving her something rather than meeting her somewhere. She was not certain this was real. She was not certain she wasn't inventing texture where there was only normalcy. She stopped being able to tell which of her perceptions were accurate. In July, Daniel took a weekend trip to see his college friend Ben in Portland. He had always done this. Annual trips, nothing unusual. Nadia said goodbye on Friday morning and he kissed her cheek and said he'd text when he landed. He texted when he landed. He came home Sunday evening with a small jar of jam from a market Ben had taken him to, the way he always brought small things back from trips. Not expensive, not dramatic, just specific. The kind of gift that requires paying attention to the person you're buying for. She set it on the counter and looked at it for a long time after he went to shower. Then she noticed his phone on the kitchen counter. Face up. A habit of hers newly acquired, the reading of surfaces. She did not look at it. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on the other side of the kitchen and looked at the jar of jam and the phone and willed herself to be a different person than the one she feared she was becoming. Paranoid, surveilling, hollowed out by the irony of suspecting a person she herself had wronged. She drank her tea. The month turned. And in Nadia's version of events, they were recovering. They were healing. She would have staked a great deal on this. She would have been wrong. The video arrived on a Tuesday. It appeared in her email at 9:14 in the morning. A file transfer, a video file, titled simply, "Goodbye We." The sender was Daniel's personal email. She was at her desk at work when she saw it. The subject line was just his name. She did not open it immediately. She looked at it for a long time. A physical sensation moving through her that she could not categorize. Not panic, not confusion, exactly, but something more fundamental. The way your body sometimes understands a thing several seconds before your mind allows it. She closed her office door. She put in her headphones. She opened the file. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. Their kitchen table. Behind him, the blue vase was visible, empty. The light was the particular light of early morning. He was wearing the gray sweater she had given him for his birthday 2 years ago. And this detail, the sweater, hit her somewhere specific, and she did not let herself follow it. He looked directly at the camera. He did not look like a man in a movie. He looked tired and clear-eyed and entirely like himself. "I'm going to say this once," he said, "and I'm going to say it as honestly as I can, because I think I owe you that, and I think I owe myself that." His voice was steady, not cold, simply steady. "I found the other things you didn't delete. The messages on your laptop. You'd cleared the app but not the cloud sync. The hotel receipt in the Alderman folder, which is not, in fact, a client expense. I know how long it actually went on. Not 5 months. I know the real number." She pressed her fingers against her mouth. "I came back in April because I wanted to believe what you told me," he said. "I think you know that. I think you also knew, when you told me 5 months, that it wasn't 5 months. And I think some part of you was relieved that I accepted it. That I was the person who would accept it, because that's who I am. I'm the person who reaches for the better explanation, who stays, who tries." He paused. "I've spent a long time understanding why I'm that person. I think it's been useful to you in ways I didn't examine closely enough." Nadia realized she was crying. Not dramatically, not with sound, simply wetly, as though something had finally given way in a place she hadn't been watching. "I don't want to talk through this again," Daniel said. "I don't think there's anything to talk through anymore. I've done the talking, in my head, with Ben, by myself at 3 in the morning, and what I've arrived at is not something that more conversation will change. I've called a lawyer. The paperwork will be arriving." He looked down briefly, then back up. "I want you to know that I don't hate you. I've thought about this carefully, and I really don't. I understand some of what happened. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but enough to know that you were looking for something I wasn't giving you, or wasn't able to give you, or that you'd stopped being able to receive from me. I don't know which of those is true. Maybe you don't either." He stopped for a moment. The morning light moved slightly behind him. "What I do know," he said, "is that I spent 7 years giving you the most careful attention I knew how to give. I know I wasn't exciting. I know I wasn't dramatic. I know that a lot of what I offered probably looked, from the inside, like predictability, like a ceiling you could stare at without surprise. And I can't fix that. I was that way. I wouldn't know how." He reached forward slightly and she heard the low click of the file ending, and then for 3 more seconds she was looking at the last frame. His face, the gray sweater, the empty blue vase, and then it went dark. She sat at her desk with her hands in her lap. The office sounds continued outside her closed door, a phone, a printer, a conversation she could not hear. She became aware that she had been holding her breath and exhaled slowly. She called his number. "The number you have dialed has been set to voicemail." She called again. And again. She tried his email. She drove to the apartment at lunch and stood in the parking structure with her keys in her hand, and then went up, and the key still worked. But the apartment was different, half empty, in the specific way of a departure rather than a robbery. Every absence curated: his books, his blue coffee mug, the photographs from the hallway that had included him. The blue vase was still there. It caught her eye, and she could not look away from it for a long moment. She called Ben. Ben picked up and said, quietly and without cruelty, that he thought she should speak to a lawyer and that he hoped she was okay, and he hung up. She tried, over the following weeks, to locate a version of events in which this could still be reversed. She rehearsed conversations. She wrote emails she did not send. She sat in sessions with Dr. Ramsden and felt herself finally, fully arriving at the true version of the story, the one without the elisions. And this version was not comfortable to inhabit, but it was real, and reality had the quality, even painful reality, of being possible to actually stand on. She understood something, slowly, that could not be unfelt, once felt. She had not lost Daniel to any failure of his. She had lost him to the accumulation of her own choices, each one small, each one seemingly retrievable, each one depositing some weight on a scale she had pretended wasn't there. She had looked at a man who loved her thoroughly and precisely and carefully and found it insufficient not because it was, but because she had not understood, could not understand until it was irrevocably gone, the difference between being looked at and being known. Owen called once, in September. She let it go to voicemail. She did not listen to the voicemail. She deleted it. The divorce was finalized in October. It was a Tuesday, which seemed somehow appropriate. That evening she sat at her kitchen table, hers alone, now, and the apartment held around her the same ordinary silence it always had, the same light, the same third floorboard she still instinctively avoided by habit. The blue vase was on the counter. She had not been able to bring herself to get rid of it, which she recognized was a kind of sentimentality that came too late and served no one. She thought about the video. She had watched it once. Only once. She thought she would probably watch it again someday, when she was further from it, when she needed to remember not what she had lost, but what she had failed to hold. She thought it might be the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her, the most honest thing she had ever been given. She thought about a Tuesday morning, the kettle, the creak of the floorboard, the coffee at the exact right distance from the edge of the nightstand, the specific, unheroic, irreplaceable devotion of a person who had paid attention to her for 7 years and asked for nothing in return except to be trusted. She had not given him that. She had given him merely everything else, or what she had told herself was everything else, while keeping the one thing he had actually needed. The night deepened around her. She did not move. Outside, the magnolia tree was bare now, the season having finished its work without asking her permission. In the morning there would be things to do, a life to continue assembling from what remained. She knew this. She was not without resources, without resilience, without the capacity to move forward, but for now she sat still and let herself be a woman who understood, finally and fully and without excuse, what she had done, not to Daniel Whitmore, whose name she would carry for 1 more month before the paperwork finished the last of its quiet work, but to herself, to the version of herself who had stood in a bathroom mirror and been surprised to look the same, who had believed that invisible damage was not damage, who had confused the absence of noise with the absence of consequence. The coffee would not appear on the nightstand in the morning. It had not appeared for 6 months. She had learned in those 6 months to make her own. She was still learning what else she would have to learn to make herself. The hardest thing about losing a person who loved you carefully is that carefulness, in memory, becomes a kind of indictment, not of him, of every moment you held it lightly,